Hi, welcome to Art with Subhashri. This is my very first YouTube video and I'm super glad that you're here. I hope you learn and enjoy painting this snowy mountainscape with me. So let's begin by looking at the materials we will be needing. I'm going to be using 3 brushes mainly, couple of smaller ones for the detailing and the larger brush for the washes. The details of all the 3 brushes are there in the description below. We will also be requiring a masking tape and I'm going to be using Arches 100% watercolor paper. I'm using the 300 GSM version. And of course we will also be needing a glass jar with water and a waste cloth or a tissue paper. We will begin by fixing the paper on the base. I'm using a cutting mat here. You can use your table, cardboard, anything that you have. Make sure all the 4 sides are fixed tightly with your masking tape and press on the edges to ensure that there is no gap and leakage that can happen. The main colors I am going to be using are Payne's Grey, Bright Blue, Cobalt Teal Blue and Prussian Blue. You can use any shade that you have, just make sure you have a darker and a lighter shade of blue. Again, the names of the colors are also put in the description of the video. Let's now start to make a simple sketch of how our painting is going to look like. We are going to have a range of mountains in the central area, then a tiny stream which is coming out of the snowy mountain. I am also going to add few pine trees to complete the look. I am now making a very light sketch of the stream and the mountain that we just drew. Because this is going to be a snowscape, a lot of our washes are going to be very light and majority of the area will also be white in color. So let's make sure that our pencil lines are really thin so that they will not show up on top of our watercolor washes. So let's begin painting. I'm first going to wet my sky area. It's going to be a gradient wash, wet on wet wash. So take your time and go around the edges of the mountain and wet the sky completely. Make sure it's neither too wet nor too dry. We should just have a shiny coat of layer on the paper. The sky is going to be a gradient wash with 2 colors, Prussian blue on the top half and bright blue on the bottom half. I have just kept a masking tape on the top side of the base so that the paper is at an angle. This is one of the tricks I use because if the paper is at an angle, the natural flow of the water is simplified and your blending becomes much easier and smoother. So I've just used simple horizontal strokes to paint the Prussian blue on top, and now I'm taking bright blue and adding it on the bottom half of the sky. Whenever you're blending 2 colors, make sure that the consistency of the paint of both the colors are very similar. If one is too liquidy and the other is thick, then you would be forming some blooms and there will be a cauliflower effect which would not look ideal. Right now I'm just running my brush over the central area where both the colors are meeting so that the blend is very smooth and neat. The next element of the painting that we are going to paint is the stream. I'm going to be using Cobalt Teal Blue as the main color for my stream. You can use any light or darker shade of blue, that's completely up to you. I am following the outline that we drew earlier and filling in the spaces there. But what I'm also going to be doing is to create tiny gaps, I am going to be leaving some white spaces, and these spaces are going to act like tiny rocks of snow that is floating on top of the streams. This adds a lot of character to our painting and makes the stream look really beautiful. So leave 2 to 3 tiny spaces, white spaces within your stream so that that space will act like your snow rock. And to give a sense of depth to our stream, I am taking a darker shade of turquoise and blue that I have and just giving a thin layer on the corners of the stream. Use a very small brush so that the darker layer doesn't seep in and it's just present in the edges of the stream. Our stream and sky is looking really vibrant and beautiful. The next part that we are going to start painting is the complete surface and the mountains. Because this is where all our snow is going to be, I want the wash to be really light and smooth. So I'm completely wetting the surface right now and will be doing a wet on wet wash. If you have noticed snow-capped mountains, you will see that some areas of the mountains are darker even though it is fully filled with snow. This is because they are on the shadow side and not on the path of light. For our painting, I am assuming that the right side is the shadow side, so I have given a very light wash of Payne's grey and bright blue there. Similarly, for the ground, I want to show some sort of bumps and falls in the surface, and I am again giving a very light wash of the Payne's grey and the blue that we use to paint the sky. You can use any light shade of blue or grey to depict the snow here. I am now repeating the exact same steps for the mountains on the left side. I am wetting the paper first, then adding a very thin coat of the Payne's grey and the blue for the mountain to show the shadow. Again, thin strokes for the surface, which will be showing the ups and downs of the snow surface. We will have to wait for this base layer to completely dry before we begin the next part. So now, as you can see, the base layer is fully dry. The next part, we are going to use a technique called dry brush technique. It is nothing but taking a thick coat of paint on your brush and then making the strokes. As you can see, the strokes are very coarse and not very smooth. But that is exactly what we want in order to depict the textures of the mountains and the surface. If your brush has a lot of paint and is very liquidy, then you might not be able to get these sort of beautiful textures. If this is the first time you're trying this technique, I would suggest you try it first in a rough sheet of paper before you directly try it on the main painting. Even though the technique is very simple, it is a little tricky and takes a few tries to get it right. The steps are, you need to have a very dry brush, a thick coat of paint on it. You can use a tissue or a rough cloth where you can dab the paint and ensure that the brush is really dry before you put it on the paper. Then you put it on the paper and make horizontal strokes so that you get these sort of beautiful textures which form your mountain and the surface. Right now I'm creating the textures mainly for the shadow area of the mountain, but what I will also be doing is creating similar textures for the other side of the mountain and also the surface. The only difference I am using is that my paint tone is much more lighter for the other sides versus the shadow. Whereas for the shadow, I am taking a very dark tone and making these dry brush strokes. Dry brush is my go-to technique for creating any sort of textures, especially for a snowscape painting. As you can see, our painting looks so much better after we have added the textures for the mountain and the surface. I hope you guys also really enjoyed this process. So for the next steps, I am going to be adding certain tiny details to just make our painting a little bit more nuanced and better. Right now I am adding small pine trees along the mountains just to show some vegetation. Because it's so tiny, I am not going into detailing. I have just put a straight line and made zigzag strokes on either side of the straight line to depict the pine trees. Now that my pine trees are done, I just want to show some textures for the surface right beneath the pine trees. So I am again using a very light wash of Payne's Grey and the dry brush technique to create this textures for the surface just under the pine trees on either sides of the mountain. We are now at the final stage of our painting. Remember the tiny spaces that we had left in the stream for adding the snow that will be floating on the water. Right now I am taking white paint and filling those spaces that we had left. This is to ensure that the snow that is floating is white and bright and there is no blue tone that is added to it. You can use a white watercolor, gouache or acrylic or any white shade that you have for it. And I'm also going to be adding tiny dots on the pine trees. This is just to show that there is snow that is settled on the pine trees. All I'm doing is just placing small dots on the pine trees that we made. I'm now going to splatter stars on my sky. This is my favorite part because it's too fun and very easy to do. Coat your brush with a thick coat of white paint and just keep tapping on it to create the stars. You can make the paint watery or thick basis the size of the stars that you want on your sky. And after your painting is completely dry, remove the masking tape at an angle and your painting is now ready. I hope you guys enjoyed painting this as much as I did. If you liked the tutorial, do like, share and subscribe to my channel. Thank you so much for joining me today.